Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Tigers Down Under, coming to you for a second time in only a couple of days because it's been a pretty eventful close of the transfer window for Hull City. So we thought we'd do a special episode just to wrap up all the incomings and outgoings at the club. And with me to dissect all of our transfers, I've got Brad with me.
Hello.
And for the first time, we've got Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No worries. We'll get started with the first deal that got wrapped up today, and that was Andrea Ranocchia from Inter Milan, which, as a general point, I guess we'd be pretty happy signing former captains of Inter Milan, but he's been a bit of a controversial one with the fans so far, with a bit of a mixed feeling about his signing. I'll start with you, Brad. What's your sense of him?
My knowledge on him is pretty limited, but probably the only concern I have is obviously that from reading a lot of what we've seen on the net in the last 24 hours or so has been his own support has been pretty mixed in opinion. But I suppose with a lot of these signings, we've just got to back Silva that he knows what he's doing a lot more than most of us.
Yeah, I mean, as I touched on, he's been captain of Inter Milan as well as representing Italy over 20 times, which is always a good thing if he's representing his country at the highest level, especially when that country is Italy. Dan, what did you make of the signing, and how do you see him fitting into the side?
Originally, I just based off him coming from Inter Milan. I thought he would be a reasonably strong player. Italy generally runs a very strong defensive footballing style. After a little more research, there's talk of him having injury problems, like persistent injury problems. He's apparently not that good under pressure, but from what I've seen, he seems to be a very good off the ball defender, and that he's good at winning the ball and good at moving forward to take the ball, but he doesn't seem to. Yeah, he's not like Davies and that, who are happy just to turn out of trouble and play a ball. He seems to panic a little bit, but overall, I mean, as Brad said, we're gonna just have to give him time and hope that he fits into the system and everything. But there's potential there is how I look at it.
And I guess, look, the positive is he's 28, which is sort of the prime for a central defender. He's pretty tall and good in the air from all reports. And one weakness we've really had for most of the season has been our defending from set pieces. So if he can sort of bring some direction and some quality at set pieces in terms of defending and cutting out some of those crosses coming into the box, that can only be a good thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he goes, and he was obviously the first one to come in the door. But next through was Alfred N'diaye, I believe is how it would be pronounced, on loan from Villareal. And I guess the interesting thing about this one was he was actually our sixth loan player, which signifies, because of Premier League rules, you can only have 5 loan players in the matchday squad at any one time. So it basically suggests that one of our loanees, whether that's Mbakani, Nias, Markovic, El Abdelawi, Ranocchia or NJ, one of them will miss out on a game day. So it's a bit of an interesting one from that perspective. But reading up on him, I mean, he's played a bit in the Premier League with Sunderland and didn't seem too bad. And obviously he's gone on to Villareal and a few other clubs like that, which is obviously a high caliber club. So I'll start with you on this one, Dan. What do you make of that signing?
Again, not enough. I haven't been able to find enough information on him really, but like the small amount I've found is he seems to be pretty solid. But I don't have a lot of opinion to offer on Alfred, unfortunately.
Well, he's got a good first name at least, which is kind of a funny one. You don't get many Alfreds, I suspect, coming out of Senegal, so that was a bit of a funny thing I noticed. But it's interesting. I've seen just recently that he's actually quite competent at centre back. So he's almost a direct replacement for Livermore in that sense, if he can play centre midfield and also fill in at centre back, which could be pretty useful. Brad, what do you make of this signing? And I guess in terms of him coming in as a loanee, is he basically just another body in the squad, do you reckon? And if so, was it really that useful using another loan spot?
Look, I'll probably answer the last bit first. I don't think it was useful. getting a midfielder or even an adaptable midfielder in as that lone spot. We really probably should have been looking at the pointy end again if we were going to take a bit of a punt on something. But in talking to someone that I know who's a Sunderland supporter, he wasn't exactly praising his abilities, but he did say that he'd seen him play in some reserve-style matches, and the one thing that he was impressed with was his movement right around the ground. He seemed to cover a lot of ground, and whether or not that's something Silver's looking at. But other than that, I know very little about him.
Yeah, I mean,
at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've had similar conversations with a Sunderland supporter I know who, it's interesting, he's another player who seems to have divided their supporter base. Half of their supporters seem to think he'll be a great addition to our squad. The other half think, that's us relegated sort of thing. So it's quite a divisive impression that he seems to have made there. It seems that he was brought in by Poirier when he was there, and then he was also shipped out by the same manager. So I'd initially assumed he was brought in by one and shipped out by the other, since Sunderland seemed to have so many managers. But it's an interesting one in that sense, because obviously Poirier was under a bit of pressure and might not have had much choice in sort of shipping and changing the team a little bit to try and stay up. But here's another one. I mean, he's only 26, so that's a great age to be coming back into the league and trying to prove himself. So he'll be young, enthusiastic, and raring to go. So I guess we just have to wait and see what he produces. The third one, which was probably the most exciting signing of the day, was our only permanent transfer of the day, coming in for £7 million thereabouts, was Kamil Grosicki from Rennes in Liga in France, the Polish international. He's 28 years of age, and we've signed him on a 3.5-year deal. But he looks pretty exciting. He seems to have a lot of pace, so he really fits that Marco Silva mould. Brad, I don't know if you've had a chance to see any of his YouTube highlights or anything like that, which seems the traditional way now to suss out strikers. But what do you make of this signing?
Yeah, I deliberately haven't read or seen anything on this guy, but I've actually gone the other way and talked to a group of mates who have been to 2 lots of Euros now, and hoping that one of them might actually remember them, because I thought that'd be a good start. And funny enough, it was a Frenchman who was very glowing about how good this guy is. He really was impressed that we managed to get him, which is a really good positive start. He said probably the thing that his knowledge of his background was pretty limited, but he said the one thing he liked is he saw the ability for this guy to actually cause trouble. And it was probably more so in some of the group games that he saw, but he just said this guy's a real winger. He's a real, I'm going to get around you and try and put something in style winger who's very creative. So, look, from that side of things, that's pretty positive. Probably the only thing that does concern me, which concerns me with a few of these players now, but I suppose in this case he's got a bit more pedigree, is they don't seem to have played a lot of football in recent years at the higher levels. Certainly, obviously, playing in the Euros is probably one of the best competitions to be part of. So he's got that background, but certainly with the other signings, there didn't seem to be much real game after game activity going on with some of those other players.
Yeah, Dan, is that a concern for you? Obviously, Ranocchia has only played, I think, 7 or 8 games this season for Inter, while N'diaye has also sort of been in and out of that Villareal side. And Grosicki, I think he's played a little bit more for Rennes, but I think I saw some stat that he's only played 3 games since the winter break, which is, I guess, 3 games in a bit over a month and a half for Rennes in France. Do you sort of, it seems a common theme this window, we've brought in these sorts of misfit players to sort of try and build our squad around, but what do you make of the signing?
I think from what I've seen, following on from what Brad said about him, he's got good footwork and he likes to take on a player and he knows what to do around the box. I saw him score a few goals. I did look up his goal scoring record. It's not as impressive as YouTube will make you believe. If he carries on his current run, he might get us 3 goals before the end of the year, which is, I really hope he does more. But I think bringing in players that at this time of year, with the run that we have and at the position we're in, bringing players in that haven't been playing regularly is a big risk. because we now have to get them match fit while we're trying to desperately win games or get these points against the teams like Manchester United and Liverpool and Arsenal in the next month. Like with Dawson and Maguire not fully fit, Davies out for 8 weeks. 8 weeks, Ranocchia is definitely going to play some part, and knowing that he's not fully fit is somewhat concerning. On Kamil, he seems to be more exciting than Markovic. And I think he looks like he will do a job. He seems reasonable at set pieces as well. He's no Snodgrass, but the way that all ended, I don't really mind seeing the back of him.
Well, we might. That's a good point, I guess, to segue into discussing the departures. And we'll talk about the window as a whole shortly. But we'll start with Alex Bruce and James Weir, who both went out on loan today to Wigan. I was a little bit surprised that Alex Bruce went out on loan, given that we kind of don't have a whole lot of fit centre-backs at the club at the moment. But Weir I wasn't as surprised about, especially with Warren Joyce, manager of Wigan at the moment, who'd know him well from his time in the United Reserves. What do we make of that? Because it pretty much spells an end to Alex Bruce's time at the club. I'll start with you, Brad, on this one. What's your thoughts on them both going out on loan, and I guess your thoughts on Bruce's career as a whole?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one with Bruce. I was surprised, but probably more so, it probably shows more about what Silver's thinking is all about. And not to go backwards here, but just talking about the players that have come in, they've all got Silver's stamp. And they're all players that, let's be honest, Mike Phelan probably wouldn't have been able to get. And therefore, Silver's obviously got a pretty decent game plan and mentality around the type of player he wants. And Bruce, being that sort of bruising, no-holds-barred central defender who doesn't necessarily play the ball like Harry Maguire, probably didn't fit that. But I was still surprised that we would let him go out on loan. Surely he's not on massive wages. Surely just having him around would have been helpful.
And he seems the sort who's pretty happy to be depth, and he doesn't really kick up a fuss if he's sitting on the bench, as backup.
Yeah, look, and certainly in our last soiree in the Premier League, I think we talked about this before. When Alex Bruce actually played, and that was the year we had the FA Cup run as well, we actually only lost one game with him starting the game at centre-half. And you'd remember going back to, he kept Suarez very, very quiet at home one night. He really knows how to get inside a striker's head, and knowing what we've got coming up, he could have been pretty handy. But then again, he could have been a month, maybe two away from even getting close to a start. We don't know how fit he is. He could be fit enough to play for Wigan, but is he fit enough to push any of our other players out? But look, I think it probably just shows where Silver's thought mentality is. He needs to try something different. He needs to do it his way. He needs to have guys who can play real attacking football. And we know that Bruce, whilst a solid defender, is probably a championship defender at best, realistically anyway.
Dan, what are your thoughts on the outgoings?
Yeah, I think Bruce's departure really just highlights the mentality and the style of football that Silva wants to implement within the team. That he really wants mobile players for the most part. He wants ball players. He wants to be moving forward quickly. And while Bruce is a solid player, I don't know if he does provide those options, and that's obviously a big part of the reason that he's gone out. As Brad said, he could have been 2 weeks away from being out of play. He could have been 2 months away from being out of play, and we're never going to know that. We're not really surprised. He wasn't really getting the opportunities. He was getting some cup games and stuff, but there's none of those left. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I hope that he gets some games at Wigan, because that's only going to benefit us in the long run if he stays around. The other one that was Rory Watson.
Oh yes, yeah, I forgot all about him. Yeah, he's signed on a permanent for Scunthorpe, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. which he said, with no view to first team at Hull, he, did what was best for him, which is fair enough. It's a bit of a shame. I mean, you always like to have a good young up-and-coming keeper on the books, but it is what it is, I suppose.
And
good luck to him.
I think probably his career highlight at Hull was when he made the bench against Liverpool in 14-15, I think, when we had a bit of an injury crisis with our keepers. I think it was the week after Harper injured himself against Arsenal, so Jakubovic started against Liverpool, and we had Watson on the bench. So I think that's probably the strongest memory I can remember of him on the field. And off the field, I know that a lot of the players have mentioned that he's probably the best singer at the club, and I saw Clucas in the Clucas in the presser before the United game was talking about how a couple of the boys had tried to get him on X Factor or something like that because he was quite a good singer. But one good bit of business I thought we did, which didn't actually involve an incoming or outgoing, was keeping hold of Andy Robertson, because there was a whole lot of drama the other night about us accepting a bid from Burnley for him, and it looks like Silva's basically come into the club, heard the news, and said, hey, "You folks are kidding yourselves. He's going nowhere," and quite rightly so. And it looks like we've held on to him. So that was really good to see as well from Silva. So I'll start with you, Dan, on that. How important was it to keep hold of Robertson?
Oh, it was vital. And not only Robertson, but there was all those bids for Maguire from Borough, which it was great to keep a hold of those players because they have been crucial, and they're going to be just as crucial in the run-in in this second half of the season. Robertson offers so much going forward. Sometimes, like he's a strong defender. Sometimes he gets caught out, but he makes up for it, and he always gives his all, which is all you can ask for. I don't think I've really seen a game where I've looked at Robertson's play and been disappointed. Like even when he's not 100% on form, he still runs his off.
But it's funny because, I mean, we were pretty willing to accept a £10 million bid for him, and I just get the feeling, even if we hold on to him until the summer, surely we'll get bigger bids from bigger clubs coming in then. I feel like so many clubs wouldn't have had a left back as a priority in January that a lot more clubs might be interested in the summer for him. Even if we do have to accept that he will leave, maybe, selling him early in the summer when we actually have time to get a replacement seems to make a bit more sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. In Robertson's case, it would be absolutely ridiculous if they sold him at this point in the season. If it comes to the end of the year and we, open up in August or July or August or whatever, and there's if it's Burnley again and they say, all right, we want to go again, then that's okay. But if you've got the whole month to do it, but he's not the kind of player that you can replace in a day. So I'm glad that whether Silva put his foot down or whether it was that, that there was no appropriate replacement found or whatever, because that was apparently the proviso. If an appropriate left back could be found, then we were willing to let him go. But it was that was never really going to happen with the time frame that was left.
And then Brad, just speaking generally, I guess, running in from that point about Robertson, as an overall point, how happy were you with our transfer window as a whole? I mean, letting Snodgrass and Livermore go, it seemed to threaten for a while to get a lot worse than that. With, as Dan's mentioned, there was the Hernandez bids, the Maguire bids, etc., all flying around. But in the end, we only let go 2 players, and we seem to have replaced them relatively well. I saw a comment that basically seemed to suggest we've improved our depth, but we've weakened our first 11, which I thought was relatively accurate. But how do you see it?
Yeah, that's a very accurate summary. I think if I look through the business, you could probably put it into 2 parts. I think the work that Silva's done, I think is really optimistic, but this is the sort of change that you'd expect to see for a guy who's really trying to resurrect our season. Probably the disappointing thing is Whilst we can talk about what money's been invested or not invested or what wages there are and so on, is the fact that we still let our two best players or two of our best five players go. And when you're trying to resurrect that season, you can't tell me that Silva wanted them to go. He's already come out, especially in the Snodgrass case, and said that he told him he's a required player. Sure, Snodgrass wanted to go, but in the end, the deal had to get done. And it seems like most of us would agree that letting him go for that price is probably a little cheap, but our hands were tied. Livermore, really, really sad to see him go, especially seeing we're spending such good dollars on bringing in a lone defender who's unproven at Premier League level. Livermore is going to be always a midfielder, but let's face it, he was a pretty damn good central defender as well. And that's probably the saddest thing about all this, but that's the business. Silva probably had to accept some money to bring in two or three of the players he has. So in the end, he's the one that falls on the sword, not us. I think probably now, though, is the time to sort of look at it and say, look, Silva's trying to back the ambition and he's really trying to do it on a shoestring. And I think the business itself looks pretty good.
And so I guess I'll wrap things up and I'll ask each of you, starting with you, Dan, a question I saw put to people on Twitter, I think by one of the journalists from the Hull Daily Mail. Compared to the 1st of January, do you feel we're more or less likely to avoid relegation based on our business in January?
Oh, Jesus. I don't want to say it. 'Cause I don't think we've really improved the squad in any remarkable way. I don't know if we're any more or less likely for relegation. I honestly think we're sort of sitting around the same position. Like, we've brought in players, but the players we've let go, and I don't know if we've really actually ended up adding any depth with the players that we've sent out on loan and sold. We're only maybe one or two players in the squad larger. It's not a significant improvement. Yeah, I sadly foresee relegation unless Silva can get this team firing really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most of the season, relegation's felt sort of a foregone conclusion, and I get the feeling if we are to go down, at least with these sorts of players, it's either going to be spectacularly or it's going to all completely implode. So I think either way, it could be quite interesting to see what happens. Brad,
it'll be spectacular either way.
Yeah. Brad, what's your take on it?
As far as it's one I'm going to actually start putting some balls on the line here. I actually think we'll avoid the drop.
Right.
And you'd know from previous discussions, I'm not necessarily Mr. Optimistic or anything, but Silva's got a clear way he thinks he can get out of this. And sure, he's never done it before at this level, and some of these players haven't either. But since he's been on deck, everything he's done has proven to be a way forward. At a point we were getting pretty stale. And whether that's Phelan's strategy or tactics or anything, Phelan itself, who knows? But we all know once this window's shut, there's only one job to do. And we'll soon find out whether these players can or not. And the one thing that we would really be able to see, obviously, going forward now is the fact that there's enough players in the squad that if Silva's not happy, he can drop them. And he can get the guys on the park that he wants. And we all know since the first day of the season, we were about 9 players short. We probably still are 2 or 3 short, but we're a lot closer to having a full squad. And I agree, the best 11 is now worse than where we started January. But the squad, even just by numbers, has improved, and I think that's the thing that we've been lacking.
Well, on that optimistic note, I'll thank both of you for coming on. So I'll start with you. Thanks, Dan.
No worries.
Good first outing. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on. And thanks for coming on, Brad.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. Hopefully we've helped you form a bit more of an opinion about the new players, and hopefully we see them running out in City colours pretty soon and helping us to a fair few wins and staying up in the league. So We've got the United game to look forward to tomorrow morning, and then we've got Liverpool Saturday night our time. So if you're in Sydney, it sounds like there's a fair few of us heading out to cheers. So it would be great to see you coming along and supporting the boys. But until next time, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
City's on fire. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're out.